Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. I want you to take a moment and think about the relationship that you value the most on this earth. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a close friend, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a child. Who is it that you feel you have the closest relationship with and the strongest relationship with? I want you to think about that person for a moment. And now I want you to consider a relationship that far exceeds even that relationship. And one that cannot even be compared by the human relationships that we have here on earth. And you probably already guessed where I'm going with this. It's our relationship with God. Our relationship with God far exceeds any relationship we have here on this earth. And the psalmist really brings this out in Psalms 139. As you can almost picture him sitting back and contemplating and thinking about his relationship with God. And he's kind of relaying that back to God and speaking that to God, talking about this relationship. And what this psalm does for us is it helps us to recognize and value the greatest relationship we can ever have, our relationship with the Lord. One thing that he brings out is God's knowledge of him. Our relationship with God exceeds any human relationship because God knows us better than anybody else. Matter of fact, God knows us better than we even know ourselves. Now listen to what the psalmist says. He says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thoughts from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before, you laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it." Maybe one of the discouraging things that you encounter with your human relationships is sometimes you get to a point where you have to recognize that this person doesn't really understand me. Maybe the other person misunderstands something that you say. Maybe they misinterpret something that you do. And maybe it might be a situation where you're going through a hard time, a difficulty. And even though that other person loves you and they really want to be there for you and they really want to understand the pain that you're experiencing, you know deep in your heart they don't really understand. Even someone who has experienced something similar to what you've experienced doesn't exactly know what you're going through because all of us are built differently. All of us have a different psychological makeup that deals with different scenarios in different ways. And so my experience of a particular event might be a little bit different than your experience of a particular event in reaction to a particular event. And so when we are with our friends and loved ones and everything, we have to look at them and say, you know what, as much as I love them, they don't have complete knowledge of me. And there is no one on this earth that completely knows you. And there's no one on this earth that knows you as well as God knows you. And that makes your relationship with Him a lot better than any relationship here on earth. Because we know when we go to the Lord in prayer and when we walk before Him in this life, we know that we have a relationship with someone who really, really gets us, that really knows us. That when we speak to Him, He knows where we're coming from. He doesn't misunderstand what we say. He doesn't misinterpret what we do. But He fully, absolutely, and completely knows us. Remember, He created us. He can read our DNA strands. He knows what's going on up in our brain, what's firing off in our brain, what activity is going on up there. He knows our psychological makeup. He knows every little intimate thing about us. And so that makes our relationship with Him very valuable because He understands us when other people do not. But also we could consider his nearness to us, or his presence with us. In verse 7, the psalmist says, "Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold of me." The psalmist knew that God was with him wherever he went, and that God's presence would be there with him even if he went up to the heights of heaven, or even if he went down to Sheol, that is the place of death. No matter where he was, he knew that God's presence was there. This is something that we don't have with our human relationships. Sometimes we have to say goodbye to our relationships here on earth. It might be because they move away, or it might be because our life situation changes where we're not able to spend as much time with them. There could be a lot of barriers to us being able to experience their presence. And of course, the ultimate one that looms over everything else is death. We know that with every relationship we have, at some point that relationship will be disturbed by death, either by our own death or the death of the person that we have the relationship with. But with our relationship with God, there's nothing to separate us from his presence, not even death itself. And so we can have a relationship with him with the confidence of knowing that he'll always be there. Some people, you may not know when you wake up in the morning whether they'll be there, but you know what? God will be there. He's there every morning when you wake up, and he's there every night when you go to sleep. And he's there all the time in between. So that makes God's relationship with us superior to those of other people. The next thing that we see the psalmist bring out is the forming of him in his mother's womb by the Lord. He says in verse 13, "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." God has known you ever since you were in your mother's womb. Who else can say that? Well, you might say, well, my mom knows that because I was inside of her, but did she really know you? Sure, she might have felt you when you kicked, when you had the hiccups. At certain times when you made your presence known, she knew that you were there. But God was actually in there with you. God's presence was there with you even in your mother's womb, and he knew you at that point, and he knew everything about you at that point. Matter of fact, the psalmist presents it as God was actually the one weaving you together and putting you together. Who else on this earth can say that? Who else has that history with you? Who else can say that? Only God can. And so that makes our relationship with him more precious than that of human relationships. And then we think about his thoughts towards us. Verse 17, he says, "How precious are your thoughts to me, O God! How vast is the sum of them! If I should count them, they would outnumber the sand. When I awake, I am still with you." God's thoughts towards the psalmist were precious to him. When he thought about how much God thinks about him, it brought comfort to his heart. And he was very, very thankful for that. And we can think about that with our human relationships, right? Sometimes it's nice to get a letter in the mail of someone just saying, you know what, I was thinking about you. Or maybe you have a friend come over and bring you a gift and say, you know what, I saw this, I thought about you, and I bought it for you. Those are all nice things that people can do for us and that we appreciate very much. But think about God. Think about the sum of thoughts that he has towards us. He's always thinking about us. Matter of fact, we could think of these two verses as our postcard or our letter in the mail that says, you know what, I'm thinking about you. This is our letter from God saying, I think about you and I think about you often. This is mind-boggling to think that the God, the creator of the universe, the one who is high above even the heavens, the one that we read about that even has to humble himself to see what's going on in heaven, this God thinks about me? That's amazing. But he does. And that should bring us comfort, that should bring us joy, that should bring us peace. And it ought to make us think, you know what, this is a God who I can have a relationship with that will far exceed any human relationship on this earth. So as you read Psalms 139, I just ask you to reflect upon these things. Think about your relationship with others. And then compare that to the relationship you can have with God. And how exceedingly great that relationship can be. When we think about a God who has knowledge of us unlike anybody else, when we think about a God who we can always be in the presence of, when we think about a God who is there with us even in our mother's womb, and we think about a God who is constantly thinking about us, that should cause us to have this strong desire to cultivate and to live within the sphere of this wonderful, blessed relationship. Well, thank you guys for listening in today. I love you guys. Hope you guys have a great day. God bless.